Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. And this time I have my longtime sparring partner, Brian Sommer. Brian and I did the first few episodes of Burning Platform. God, 2 years ago, Brian? It's been a while. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Because I've done 100 since. So it's good to have you back. We're going to do 2 episodes. Today, Brian is going to present on 3 items on his research agenda. And then in the next episode, I'm going to present on 3 on my research agenda. The good news with today's is, at least on 2 of them, we won't be sparring much. I think I'll compliment what he's saying. There's one, though, that I think we'll have some fireworks. So, Brian, hope you're ready for that.
So I'll go ahead and play spoiler alert for those of you. We're going to talk about 3 things today. The first one, these are all issues that are very challenging for executive committees and boards all over the planet right now. One of them is the fact that I can't find a company yet that's won the war for talent, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. The second one has to do with ESG, and a subject near and dear to my heart, but we'll talk about that. And the third one has to do with the kinds of questions coming out of executive committees around AI and what that means for the uptake of that technology in companies going forward. So those are the 3 things we're going to talk about. So I think it will be, sparring comments aside, it'll be a fast and furious 30 minutes, and with about 10 minutes for each one of these subjects.
You're going to keep the audience in suspense. You didn't tell them which of the 3 we're going to spar over. That's okay. They'll see it soon enough.
I'm not going to predict that, because you'll just piss me off just for the grins and giggles on all 3 of them if I do that. You said, but I'm going to hold you to it. You said we're not going to argue on 2 out of the 3. So let's see if you can keep your word on that point.
I think the points you make, I don't think I disagree with. I'll add to them. I'm seeing some new dimensions in each AI and the war for talent that probably you won't bring out. But kick it off, Brian.
So let's talk about the war for talent. There are just some fascinating things. I keep reading about this stuff. You can put the word quiet in front of everything now. Quiet quitting, quiet hiring, quiet whatever. I like the one in the middle there, the silent sabotage. How boomers are ruining the workplace for everyone. Are you being quiet fired? You can see this. Oh, and the other one, lazy girl jobs. What a name. I've
not heard that before. Explain to me. Probably the audience hasn't heard it. Explain to me what you mean.
A lazy girl job definitionally is where people just want to come in, do their 40 hours, no more. They don't want any extra overtime, whatever. Just give me my 40 hours, give me my full pay for that, and leave me alone. It's like the ultimate work personal kind of balance relationship that people want. And that's kind of interesting.
They may have 2nd and 3rd jobs too, right? So there's some, but what you're saying is that there's a growing number of people who just want to punch their clocks for 40 hours and that's it.
Well, it's mainly because they realize that their employer's not really offering them anything special if they kill themselves in service of the firm. There's, loyalty's gone. So why kill yourself for an employer when what you really want is you want a job where you get paid fairly for it? I'm currently working on a piece right now. And what's astonishing to me is how many companies, and particularly in some professions, expect people to work 80 hours a week. That's 80 hours a week on a continuous basis. And then they're going to complain that these people are burning out, leaving, and everything else. Well, duh. If you create, what we need we need companies to do a better job of figuring out just exactly how many people do you need to do the particular role. Have we used automation in the correct way so that we can free people up from all the administrivia to get them focused on the right things? And I could go on and on, but you asked about lazy girl jobs. I don't like the name. I think it's a pejorative name, but the sentiment that people want to get paid a fair wage and have a reasonable chance of having a realistic life, a home life or life outside of work, I think is not an excessive thing. The other thing I'd just point out on this slide is just look at where these articles are appearing: Wall Street Journal, HBR, Forbes, and so forth. This is not like this isn't getting attention, but this goes to my point that companies aren't solving the war for talent right now. And if you don't get these parts fixed, then you can't ever win the talent attraction aspect of it either. So there's really three problems in this area. You have a supply problem where people, and I've got a client right now where they've overfished the same pools for talent, and they're frustrated that they can't get any new resumes in or whatever. In fact, one client told me that if they get any experienced hire resumes just come in the door, that person automatically gets an interview, a screening interview. That's how tough it is for them. Now, on the flip side, there's junk going into the supply chain for talent. There's one guy I was reading about in Wired magazine, I believe. He used a bot, an AI bot, to automatically apply for 5,000 open software jobs in 1 week. And of course, recruiters hate that stuff because it causes all kind of work for them. Anyway, we have three problem areas for the war for talent: supply chain, the supply, the pastoral care, and dealing with other people. Reuse is, I guess, the way I would call it. All right, Vinnie, let's hear the barbs. What do you think on this one?
It's not the barbs. I'm going to add three other dimensions. Okay. I think if you look at what we've kind of focused on the last decade, we've been so focused on employee experience. Okay. And we haven't been paying enough attention to employee productivity. To your point, it's like, why are we making them work 80 hours? If they can do it in 42 hours, why not, right? And, one of my agenda items is different from what you call it. I call them super workers. How do we build super workers? I've been fascinated with UPS. UPS has hundreds of drivers who have driven 1 million miles without an accident. Think about that. Mm-hmm. Because of telematics, because of all their other investments in their logistics technology, their trucks, and so on. Right? You look at Amazon. You look at the distribution center. I mean, they redefined the workflow to bring work to the worker rather than having workers walk miles in the big distribution centers or carry heavy stuff. The robots are doing that. These guys are primarily just packing, right? So, and if you look at how many in the distribution centers they only have 3,000 or 4,000 employees max, right? So the productivity has been remarkable. I think HR needs to start focusing on automation to make, not just to eliminate jobs, but to make their employees super workers. So that's one point. The second thing that I find very frustrating, Brian, is what I call the where and when of work, right? I see too many CEOs say, you got to come into work. And there's no empathy to these poor guys having to commute 2 hours, probably in unsafe conditions. Why would they do that, right? It's just an ego. A CEO actually told me this. He says, most CEOs like to see people around. It strokes their ego. Okay.
So I'm going to actually agree with you big time on that last point. So call Ripley's or Guinness, whatever. I'm going to agree with you on that. And let me just underscore that a little bit more. What's missing, and I got a real PhD course in this when I was with the people at OC Tanner this year, is too few firms actually are building empathetic leaders. Because if you had an empathetic leader, they would realize that a big part of their job is to create the work environment that causes people to want to stay years longer than they otherwise would have. And so whether that's safety or improved automation or get them out of the scut work or whatever, that's what a great boss is supposed to do. Take all that friction out of their work and lives and make them love their job. And we just don't have enough of those.
We're being tough on the executives, but the employees also. The work ethic has dropped dramatically, right? People are throwing hissy fits if you tell them to come into the office for 2 days a week. I mean, Brian, you and I grew up and we were told to get on a plane tomorrow. We did it, right? I mean, I look back to when I was at Gartner. I was one of the first remote analysts. Technology was really poor, and remote was a misnomer. I was in headquarters Half the time I was doing events around the country, et cetera, et cetera. You and I can work on a plane. You and I can work in a Starbucks. You and I can work in a hotel room. The time and place of work should be a non-issue. We've lost our way in that sense. And I blame both the executives and the ordinary workers. Okay. The third point I would make is I'm not seeing enough, right? And maybe because we are getting into that age group, we're not seeing enough of a focus on aging workforce. I mean, that's a gold mine of talent. Many of them want to come back to work. They're not ready to retire. You and I know several people who threaten to retire and never retire, right? So, and with all the investment that's going into mental acuity and so on, we're going to have an increasingly aging workforce. We better learn to use them far better than we're doing right now. Okay, so we talk about, oh, we are so, diversity means we're not sexist, we're not racist. What about ageist? I don't see enough attention to that. And you and I
would agree. I would agree. The ageist deal is a real problem. Well, let's shift gears because I want to be mindful of we're working fast today. The second topic is on ESG. And I've put this slide up for one very important reason, because to me, ESG is not a one-dimensional deal. It is not about strictly environmental stuff. It's not about just one function of the company, like supply chain or procurement or legal or whatever. This thing's multifaceted, multidimensional, and it goes all over the place. And these are just some of the concerns or whatever the issues right now. But there are things a lot of people don't think about, like a lot of the Gen Z kind of workers. They actually do check up on the ESG record of companies. They want to read the social responsibility reports that are coming out with with the financials. The lawsuit stuff and the risk management things were things that really came into view for me in the last 6 or 8 months, particularly around things like forever chemicals and the like. And by the way, if you haven't tried on the consumer taste, if you haven't tried to buy a gasoline-powered weed eater or drill or lawnmower, you're finding much fewer of those out there because consumer taste has definitely started to shift. And the shorthand for ESG, let me just give you these 3 little things to think about. When you think about the environmental part of ESG, it's about the interaction of a company with the planet. You can see some of the things that you're supposed to track on this screen. The social side, and this is the key word, is all about relationships. It's the relationship between the company and its workforce, between company and suppliers and their suppliers and so forth, with governments and a whole bunch of other things. And then on the governance side, it's all about what have you got in place that's going to make sure that you deliver on the things that you're hoping to achieve. And this is the problem right now from a technology and data perspective. And this is the last of my slides. The coral colored area is the old style way of collecting and using information that many enterprises have. This is the scope of ERP. And I'm sure Vinnie's going to take us down memory lane with Gartner Group and the ERP definition. But what's actually happening is with ESG reporting requirements, you got to go all the way back like to a farm or a mine or what have you. And you have to start capturing all these other costs for transportation, additional processing, like before it even hits your farm. And then you also have to track what happens on the rest of the value chain as the products and their packaging and everything else end up with consumers. The gray band are all these human and social things. What do you know about the labor practices and so forth of the suppliers or their suppliers? And then you've got all the other kind of tracking of all this other stuff. This is at the heart of the ESG issue here. And more importantly, what I've been really fascinated listening to companies is almost all companies genuinely are trying to solve the 1 or 2 big environmental problems they solve. Where they're getting to everything else on here on the social and so forth, that may be up for grabs right now. But
fine, they're probably listening to me. I won't disagree with you on the east side, though it's been hijacked. I'll come to that. S&G, I have a huge issue with. So they're listening to me. I'm glad to hear that. But let me just react here. First of all, Brian, congratulations on the book. You've got an ESG book out. Very, very there you go. Glad you're pitching it. I found it as usual. I expected your work to be structured, and it is. But I kept thinking, my God, he's trying to bring structure to ideas that are coming out of activists, politicians, and bureaucrats. Those guys don't think in business terms, Brian. They're driven by ideology. Okay, and that's a huge issue that I have. Now, you and I both started our careers in accounting firms, right? You went into consulting.
I never was an accountant.
Exactly.
But, okay.
Exactly. But I was. You didn't have to endure the audit, the torture that I went through. But one of the first things, and one of the only things I remember from that phase 40 years ago, was this guy. I can see his face now. He goes, guys, you'll be required to come up with internal control recommendations. Don't forget this. Make sure the value of the internal control exceeds the cost of that control. Accounting firms have forgotten that, Brian. I saw that during Sarbanes-Oxley 20 years ago. Okay, I saw that when somebody actually took my words and said it in a letter. A CFO sent a letter to the SEC saying the value that we're seeing from Section 404 of Sarbanes-Oxley is nothing compared to the cost. Okay, now Section 404 was 168 words. 168 words. Okay, I wrote a blog called $1 billion a word. ESG is much, much, much bigger. I'm just scared by how much money, how much burden we're going to put on our corporations. So that's one thing. Now let me go back to your E part. I love the fact that you have forever chemicals. I'm big into circular economy. I'm big into reducing waste, better package design, all that. Nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, the E has been hijacked by the emissions cloud. And that is so political, because if you really are worried about emissions, Brian, why aren't we challenging China, India, South Africa, Indonesia, all these countries that use so much coal? China has 3 times the greenhouse emissions we do, the US does. India has as much as the EU. All the other countries are probably 2 or 3 times us. Whatever we do in the West doesn't matter till we challenge them. Why aren't we doing that? If emissions are an issue, why aren't we pushing nuclear? Why aren't we pushing carbon capture? Oil is not evil. From a barrel of oil, that there's plenty of everyday items that get made, chemicals, just a whole bunch of plastics and so on. That's not the evil part. The evil part is the emissions. Why don't we capture carbon? It bothers me that we have just picked up on a wind and solar agenda and keep pushing it. Nothing wrong with that. But I look at Germany. Germany's been trying it for 50 years. When the OPEC oil embargo happened in 1973, all the European countries woke up to the fact that they didn't have natural resources. They would have to come up with some different alternatives. Well, France went with nuclear, Norway had hydroelectric, Iceland went with geothermal, and they're much greener than Germany. Germany, after 50 years, has only gotten to about 50% of their economy running on wind and solar. And people say, well, it's much higher than that. No, it's not. Their aviation is not looking at electrification. They're looking at sustainable aviation fuel. Their tankers are looking at much cleaner LNG, liquefied natural gas, right? The consumers are continue to buy diesel and hybrids. So, we've got to be a little bit, we've got to start asking these questions. If Germany, after 50 years, has only gotten so far, why do we as a world, right now as a world, we are only 5% wind and solar. Why do we think it's going to magically be quicker with the rest of the world? Okay, so that's one thing. I think the emissions has been hijacked, and I wish people would come back to your point of view on E. Now, on the social and governance, Brian, look, let's talk about social. I'm going to personalize it. I'm a brown man. I'm an immigrant. I have never expected to be rewarded for my ethnicity. I never even signed up Deal Architect for an SBA registration. I've been asked by several people, why don't you register as a small business? I want to be hired on my competence, not my ethnicity. Okay. Now, I've also had the chance to travel to 75 countries. I've worked in, I've lived in, I've traveled to 75 countries. We keep beating ourselves up saying we are so racist, we are so whatever. I could give you example after example from each of these 75 countries that will make your skin crawl. You've been there, you've seen it, right? Why are we beating ourselves up so much? Why are we beating up our corporations so much? And governance, Brian, you look at what happens when you confuse profit-based governance with non-profit-based governance. Look at OpenAI. Look at the mess they have right now, because you had all kinds of highfalutin goals about security and safety around AI and so on, and it completely, they couldn't reconcile that with the profit-based agenda that they have. I mean, for their valuation, people expect a lot of money back, right? So I am not a big fan of either the S or the G. You said we need to build societal trust. My pushback is, why not consumer trust, right? I mean, we have lost example after example of where, you look at Bud Light, you look at Disney, you look at so many examples where corporations have gone just haywire by losing focus on their core customer. I would rather us come back to, let's focus on the customer, let's listen to them. This week or this month, 4,000 dealers around the country have sent the president a note saying, we admire what you're doing with BEVs, battery-run electrified vehicles, but the fact is the regulations are ahead of consumer demand. We, the dealers, are in touch with consumers better than any think tank, any government agency. We talk to consumers all the time. We're not telling you this because we have an agenda. We'll sell whatever we can sell. We have lots and lots of filled with unsold BEVs. Now, this is what happens when you have, unintended consequences of pushing an agenda that sounds good, but you're not listening to the customer base. So, I mean, Brian, that's where my ESG pushback comes. I think E has been hijacked. S and G are just.
Well, we definitely disagree on this one. I don't think it's been so much hijacked, maybe the way you think it is. I know it's been hijacked by politicians who want to put all kinds of words around it. But let's focus on what's really happening inside companies. I made a remark a minute ago about how there are almost everyone that I spoke with is focused on solving one or two major issues in their vertical, their industry, or whatever. And they're doing it in their own self-interest because they know that competitively, as well as to attract customers, they've got to have a better kind of product out there on the market. So they're doing that. And, and I never.
They're making money. They're making, I mean, I wrote something on Eastman Chemical. Eastman, they're doing molecular recycling of plastic waste. They're making money off it, right? So there's an opportunity. Don't get me wrong. It's the emissions part that I have a problem with, because if you look at all the ESG reporting and all that, everybody's focusing on emissions. And that's driven by an agenda of, well, oil is evil and nuclear is dangerous. And like, guys, after Ukraine.
Okay, Vinnie.
Yeah.
Because I got to transition to the third piece. I'm just going to say this. There's a big difference between ESG reporting and doing. And what I saw when I was digging in on these, the research for the book, there's a lot of doing going on. It's just a lot of it's very sub rosa. Most companies would talk to me all day long about their regulatory reporting because there's nothing competitive really about that. But when it came to what's going on inside, and what they're doing with their products, because some of these things require 5, 10, 15 years to completely re-engineer like an old school manufacturing process. And there's some they haven't cracked the code on yet, and they're still working on it. They don't want to talk about that and go on record on it because that may give a competitor advantage. And I can respect.
Then I have no issue with that, because that falls into my innovation agenda. I have no issue with that. All I'm telling you is, the activists are pushing the emissions agenda a little too hard, and politicians are. And
okay.
That's why ESG has become kind of branded as that. Anyway, let's move on to AI. This is the most exciting part, Brian.
Well, yeah, this is the shiny penny right now in the market. And you can see I put the antacids picture on the side here. I got a call the other day from the controller of a Fortune 500 tech company. And she called me late one evening because she had just hung up with her CEO, and he was, of all things, playing with Chat GPT with his teenage son. And that got the CEO thinking, are we losing competitive advantage because we're not using generative AI in the finance function in this company? I go, no, you're not losing anything right now, because about the only thing you could do that you could have bought that's commercially available would be some machine learning stuff for process automation and that kind of stuff. I go, but things are coming out and you will be able to take advantage of that going forward. I tell that anecdote because these kind of questions are coming up in executive committees, because this is one kind of technology that executives don't automatically understand in its entirety right off the bat. And they have all these kinds of issues that they need to get answers to before they're ready to really start committing in any big way. So I just put that out there, that this is one, there's not a regulatory push behind it like with ESG. There's not a, but it's not an old technology that we're very familiar with, and we know the risk and the challenges associated with it. This is a different animal altogether. And the only other thing I was going to point out is, when I look at the amount of money and hiring and so forth that's going in here, it is astonishing. And I just updated this slide because I wanted to get the newest numbers from Accenture. This is just one firm. They're going to hire 80,000 people. That's the bottom line there, through acquisitions, training, whatever, to be AI experts. I don't know of any other technology that had this kind of like gold rush mentality about, we've got to get all the data scientists and everything else we can get, the way AI has. And so it's confusing to the executive committee. They don't know what to do or what they should buy or how they should approach it. And there's a pile of like integrators and tech companies and others who are going to hire up every person around, which brings us full circle. This will be the next war for talent problem that companies are dealing with. So, Vinnie, go ahead and pick out on this one.
I was going to say my points of view are, this is a really, the last 6 months, if you look at learning platforms I've talked to people about large learning models, LLMs, talked to them about GPUs, I've talked to them about, compute loads of hyperscalers. I've talked to them about use cases at application vendors. I've talked to the integrators about their hiring. Like you say, I talked to an Accenture partner about that. Here's the interesting thing. For all the investment that is going on, the application vendors are being overly cautious in their use cases, right? What have we seen? We've seen finance, HR, procurement. We're paving the old cow paths. The integrators are not applying it to themselves. One of the biggest, if you talk to hyperscalers, one of the biggest use cases for them is DevOps productivity. Instead of Accenture hiring 80,000 people, why not automate a bunch of stuff that they've been doing for 20, 30, 40 years? How many ERP projects have they done, Brian? 10,000, 15,000?
Yeah, all I know is it's in the thousands, yeah.
How many test scripts do they have? How many training modules did they have? How many parameter configurations do they have? How many integration definitions do they have? Why not use LLMs to come up with the next client draft one of all of this, right?
Well, Vinnie, you've always been like an AI tool because you've been hallucinating for decades, and I couldn't wait to slip that one in. But yeah, I've seen some of the predictions some people are making for next year, and they think next year is the year that verticalization, your favorite topic, is going to really start coming in big in AI. And some of the pundits out there would agree with your assessment that a lot of what's been out there is super derivative, not terribly imaginative, like, so I got a job description generation tool, big whoop. So
Malcolm Frank, ex-cognizant, I had him on one of these, and he goes,
I like Malcolm. He's good.
He made a great comment. He says, Vinnie, we are still trying to solve ESG and AI. Why don't we look at cost of goods sold? So much bigger opportunity for us. And my response to that is, why just cost of goods sold? Why not revenue? Why not the whole P&L? There's so much opportunity, we just aren't being ambitious about it. I'm also seeing a couple of other things, Brian. I'm seeing Wall Street, because NVIDIA has had such a phenomenal run, and premiums everywhere and shortages everywhere. They're using that to go to every vendor to say, shouldn't you be charging a premium for your AI? I mean, not if the value is not there, right? So I think we're going through a phase where everybody's got matching expectations.
Well, I think the thing that Wall Street ought to wake up and smell the coffee on is with more than just Accenture, it's Deloitte, it's Price, it's some of the big integrators, the IBMs, whatever. I know they wouldn't hire all these people unless they were definitely going to pursue these like strong verticals or other kinds of solutions. I mean, we're going to see this in insurance underwriting and a million other kind of applications. And Wall Street ought to pay attention, because these other firms have resources and the ability to create all these verticals that are going to basically box in, I think, the old school ERP vendors and relegate them to a lower growth kind of area. And these other guys are going to take all the high growth opportunity, and they have the people, the means, and everything else to do it. So if I were a Wall Street financial analyst, I'd be raking some vendors over the coals because they don't have a coherent or even known strategy on how they're going to move this part of their, business forward. And the answer is not to just do a partnership.
I've seen some transcripts, earnings call transcripts, where everybody was, how are you going to monetize this? Aren't you going to be stuck with NVIDIA GPU costs? And how are you going to pass that along? I mean, so that's one thing. I'm seeing, Brian, because generative AI is generating so much interest, predictive AI, demand forecasting, and predictive maintenance and so on, get a resurgence. And what we're finding is there are many new data streams that have become available. I like to use the example of Costco. They had a pilot project where they looked at food court, demand in food courts. Now, they have a policy that if something is not sold within an hour, they toss it. So they can't produce too much. On the other hand, if they don't have enough, they lose revenue. So this is 5 years ago. They were already starting to factor in. They had skewed data from 10 years for every store, right? They were starting to add weather data. Because many Costcos have gas stations, they were starting to factor gas prices, right? Gas prices, if Costco is 20-25 cents cheaper than a gas station within 10 miles, people will actually drive to Costco. And if they drive to Costco, they'll go into the store. That'll affect it. So the number of data streams that are starting to become available has grown dramatically in the last few years. And that's where I think vendors are being a little cocky. I think there are a lot of customers that have unique, high-value data that they're going to learn to monetize. They're going to sell that stuff rather than just, let the vendors have it for free. So it's just some interesting, the next few years are going to be really exciting.
All right. Well, we wanted to keep this to 30 minutes.
One final comment. In the last couple of weeks, I've been on Unit 4 and IFS briefings. And it was nice to see them actually talk about transactional functionality. Very little focus on AI. It was like, guys, if you look at a grid of functionality by country, by vertical, 75% does not have capability. I'm glad, guys, don't forget you didn't finish the first part. You need to be continuing to build your functionality out. So
Well, just remember, you can't spell the word pain without the letters AI. So, yeah, there's definitely some pain in some of the woefully thin product roadmaps. And I'm sorry, I just can't get overly excited about things like job description generators, being a focus of a vendor, and what they want to show us. I expect a lot better thinking from these companies going forward. Anyway,
that's part of the problem, though. If you look at their domain expertise, they're very strong in HR or accounting or procurement. That's their domain expertise. How do you expect them to think about the rest of cost of goods sold? They cannot. I mean, one of the things that
so five years ago, I did a show called Accounting is Big Data. I did it for the American Accounting Association. And I ended up with like an hour and a half keynote block where I took every major line item on the P&L and I showed them then how you could use big data and or like an AI tool to generate these amazing new kinds of outcomes. And it was, to say the least, eye-opening, because these people had never thought about using all these other non-accounting data sources. For example, did you know that if you could get your restaurant or hotel to get a 1-star improvement on like its Yelp ratings or whatever, that generally translates to a 12.8% increase in net revenue? To your point about why don't we focus on the top line? That was just one example. And I think the audience was skeptical when I kicked that talk off, but boy, by the time I was plowing through about the first 10 line items, they were just like sitting there like the old Maxell tape guy in the chair with their hair blowing back, well, you don't have that problem, but anyway, it was a fascinating thing to see.
You should talk.
Yeah, it's getting thin. All right. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and bring this episode to a close. Next time, you're the one that's going to be trying to present, and I get to fire arrows and missiles and exosets or whatever at you.
I was pretty nice, so be kind.
All right.
All right, sir. Thank you. Good to have you back, and look forward to doing the next one.
Okay. Take care.